Alright, so as I was saying, I am now visiting the Tremors sequels for the very first time, and so I just finished the second movie, like, about 5 minutes ago, and now I'm doing this immediately. But before we go into that, I was going to mention that apparently some people mentioned the series, which I wasn't really familiar with either, and asked if we were going to talk about that, which I wasn't initially planning on doing that. I was just going to do the movies, but I've heard enough positive things in this last, like, this little bit of time since we did that video, that first video, that I figure I might as well. I'll probably just do, because I think I looked up and it's just like 13 episodes or something, which is pretty easy, so I figure I'll just kind of watch all those at once and do like one video at the end after we've done all the movies. Unless I hear there's like, I have no idea, but if somebody were to mention like there's certain like canon introduced in the series or something that has to be known in the movies that came after it, I have no idea if that's how it works, but my plan as of now is to just do all the movies and then I'll just do the series at the end. So that's, I think, how we'll handle that. Now, as far as this one goes, uh, Tremors 2 Aftershocks, which is a low-key amazing title. um, right away, I was surprised because I was under the impression that once we got into straight-to-video territory that it was strictly, like, this is when Burr kind of became the poster child. I didn't realize that Fred Ward came back for this one. So, but I do believe this was the last one he was in, if I heard correctly, or I've seen correctly, just seeing the posters and the DVD cases around. But as far as that goes, it is to my understanding that this actually was supposed to be a theatrical release at one point, and the whole thing where it was actually going to have Kevin Bacon and Reva coming back, but I think it was like Bacon had just signed on for Apollo 13 and was in the midst of doing Apollo 13, and Reva was touring, which is pretty much the only reason they didn't come back. Like, it wasn't a case of, oh no, we're above that now. It was just simply they were too busy. And it was, the studio just said, like, well, now that we don't have them as a draw, we don't want to put that much money into it, so we're just going to do the straight-to-video thing. And take a massive chunk out of the budget. But apparently that didn't hurt too terribly, because this had apparently overwhelming positive reactions, and that, like, almost propelled it into a theatrical release, but it just ended up being too expensive, apparently. And that's the thing, is I'm one of those people also where I try to be as open-minded as I can possibly be, but there is a stigmatism that comes with the straight-to-video sequel, especially when there's multiple straight-to-video sequels, so there, more often than not, I go into a straight-to-video sequel quite cynical and with expectations really low. But there was just something, I just had kind of a positive vibe going into this, I think. I guess because I had heard about, it having overwhelmingly positive reactions for a straight-to-video sequel. And, yeah, pretty much every time I had something that made me go, oh, I don't know, the movie, like, helped. Like, it proved that doubt wrong. Immediately starting with the opening credits, where when I was talking about at the beginning, or in the first movie, about how, the practical effects were like one of the most appealing things about it, and I was afraid that once we got into straight-to-video territory, because things were going to start getting cheaper, if we were going to start getting, like, cheap CGI in place of those practical effects. And I was really worried when there is actually, in one of the opening credits, somebody is credited as, like, CG creatures created by, and then the credit, and it's like, oh, so they're just telling us straight up front they're going to CG right now, that sucks. And that got my worries really high, and then I saw the effects, and they went the, as weird as this to say about a straight-to-video sequel, they went the Spielberg route, where it's a lot of practical effects with, like, just enough CGI to get by, basically. Which is really, that's pretty much the best way to go, if you can, is to combine the practical and the CGI to kind of accomplish what you can with a budget this small. So that was, and then, like, the scenes towards the end when things are getting really, obviously when they start, birthing the smaller creatures, it's very clear, animation. But that combination of, like, when they start stacking on each other, which looks a little ridiculous with the technology they have, but then there's the moment where, like, the tongue or whatever it is. I'm not quite sure of that. I'm sure as the series goes on, I will be more familiar with their anatomy. But the tongue-like thing kind of comes over, and that's clearly practical. And whenever they blow up, that's clearly practical. And basically, the only time they're CGI is when they're moving. When they're like still or they're moving just a little bit, it's like a practical effect. And that combination of things helps a lot. It helps the movie's integrity a lot. So like if everything we saw related to the creatures was CGI, and this the CGI that we see in this especially, I don't know if this movie will be the quality that it does. That's how long of a way that goes. That commitment to the practical. So that was really I was really happy to see that throughout it. And then there was the other thing about writing Val out, and I was curious because it's the whole idea of Val basically just rejecting the offer because he's married now and doing that whole thing. And it's like I was genuinely afraid they were just gonna say that he died or something. And it's like for some reason, even though I don't foresee Kevin Bacon doing another movie like this anytime soon, even though apparently he shot a pilot that never like came to be or like never saw the light of day or something. Um, I suppose it's not out of the realm of possibility, but I would say in the meantime, we won't. But the idea of just Val sort of living on, like even though we're not seeing him, I feel like is a lot better than what they usually do in that scenario where they just say, "Oh yeah, he died, by the way." So that's nice, and I love the way they show the aftermath of the first movie, where it's like he and Earl got famous, and Burt, they all got famous, but that whole idea of when they show up to get Earl after they offer him this after Val has apparently rejected it. It's that same old thing of the person's like really jaded and doesn't want to do it because they've already been through the shit and stuff like that. But I like the added quality of jadedness where it's not just that he went through the shit, it's that they got really famous, they did the Reebok commercial, they have the arcade game that he has, and it's like after all this he never got like rich off of it like you would expect, and it's like that's just the sort of extra level of jadedness that adds to the character is really great also, and kind of feels like it's turning that little cliche on its head a little bit. um, and then of course, because we don't have a Val now, we have to introduce another character. Grady, I think his name was. And the thing about that was, the thing that's interesting about Grady in general is he's the kind of character where when he's introduced and we see him in like his first and second scenes, he seems like the kind of character in any other movie like this that would die immediately. And it's like, and it's a character you probably wouldn't miss if they die immediately. And it's kind of weird how quickly he grew on me in a way I wasn't really expecting. And I think the thing about it that's interesting is that when we see Val and Earl, and I was talking about how that's one of the strong aspects of the non-creature stuff in the first movie, is how Val and Earl have this camaraderie that seems like really lived in, and just watching them interact in general is some of the most entertaining stuff of the movie, before they're even blowing up worms, but the fact that they seem pretty much cut from the same cloth and how they went together so easily, and the fact that Grady's like the exact opposite of that. Like he's the exact opposite of being cut from the same cloth as Earl. And it was almost like when they started doing the rock paper scissors bit. At first, it was like it was funny when they brought it back, but it was also kind of a bummer because it makes you miss the camaraderie with Val. But then, as it goes on, it's almost like it's like the character just grows on you in the same way that he grows on Earl, basically. Like it's basically Earl's basically our audience surrogate when it comes to this character. And I feel like we kind of grew on him in the same. I don't know what the general opinion is of this character because I could see it going either way. But I looked him up on IMDb to see if I knew him from something else, and I noticed while I was looking through his profile, apparently this is the last one he's in as well. So so much for that whole getting another character to grow on us, but okay. Um, and when I was talking about before about how these movies have to have a lot of creativity because they're initially set out in the middle of nowhere, and we're kind of continuing on that here, and there's only so much you can do with that with mostly like exterior scenes and just being like out in fields or desert or whatever. Having to kill these things that are underground, and especially as the budget's going down, these things are probably going to be less seen, even more so than they were before. So we won't see the ground moving as much as we used to, and certainly not the size of the worms. Any practical effect, as great as it looks, will be like much more in close up, so we're not getting as full of a look. But it's all still there the way they handle it. I like the detail of when they can tell where it is by the approaching music, and then the way that ends up paying off with the we get like setups that pay off very quickly, just like lines here and there that were working for me, like the fact that Grady kept setting up that he wanted to open a theme park about like basically about this, and then the truck scene where it's pulling the chain happens, and then just that immediate callback of there's our first ride idea. That's very funny. I was kind of maybe I missed something here, like a detail here. I did spend most of that scene wondering why he wasn't just unhooking the chain, but you know where the then the scene wouldn't have been as fun as it was. So that's the reason for that. And then, of course, we do get our return of Bert, where they explain where Reba is now. And we see him he's found himself in this dead end post-fame. He's got the head of the worm mounted on the wall with the deer heads and stuff like that, which is very funny. And he's just watching war documentaries and stuffing his face. And I love I don't know why I love this so much. That very perfectly timed crumb on his chin as he's trying to explain, oh no, I'm doing just fine, everything's great, and it just kind of drops off. It's like the timing on that was so... That's one of those happy accidents that you could have never planned, and I love that. And it just says so much about where the character's at. But then obviously he immediately comes out, and I can see, like I was saying, I was under the impression that Bert basically took over from this movie like he was the poster child of this movie forward, the way he is like later on. But here you can see where he's like in the process of building a character that we're going to want to see for multiple movies now, and eventually becomes, you know, the front and center of the posters on these as they keep coming out. And what I really liked also about this was when I was talking about before with that creativity where you only have so much to work with the concept, you gotta keep like raising the obstacles and like bringing in more obstacles, and the question is, what are those gonna be? And it was really smart to focus on how the worms like function, because we really didn't get much of anything in the first movie, which in the first movie that really works because it's like this sort of simplicity factor that really works for it. But here, now that we're getting multiple movies, we can really delve into what exactly they are and how they function and what could make them worse and more threatening as we go on. And the way that they seem to be getting smarter is one obstacle immediately that's going to really raise the stakes. But then you've also got... actually before that, there's also the whole idea of... somebody mentioned on the last video about how... it doesn't really have a horror vibe. Like, it never really feels like a horror vibe the first movie did. And sure enough, when you go to IMDb, the genre is listed for it. Horror is there, but even before horror, comedy is listed. So it's like it's very sort of loosely horror in the way it's dealt with. Like, it's horror kind of in like like that sort of traditional sense of like the 50s monster movie that was never really that scary, but it was just like in genre, it was considered that. And that's a good point. So what I really liked about this was, even though the monsters can look maybe a bit cheesy and like they're from some B-movie from the 50s or something, what I think really helps them build up their terror level in this is the way Earl reacts to them. Like, kind of helps them sort of build that up, where he starts freaking out. He's saying like it's a whole new goddamn ball game, and just like the terror in his voice when he talks about them kind of makes them this whole other thing. And then the fact that at first it appears that they're like evolving before they realize what's actually going on, and they're spawning, they're multiplying. And just that whole idea of there's that sort of scary element there right in the middle, where before they realize they're multiplying, which is probably even scarier than them like evolving. But the whole idea of them getting smarter is obviously them evolving in that way, and then the idea of them evolving physically on top of that is like a power that you would never want these things to have. Yeah, I'd almost say them multiplying is probably, even if they, you know, multiply in smaller forms, and the fact that they walk is kind of, like, even if it's really, you know, cheap-looking CGI, it's still kind of creepy that they walk and what they look like. Um, and then those moments where we do get like the practical effects when they start when we see like how they seek heat and stuff like that. Um, and like I was saying, it goes a long way with how they combined the practical and the CGI, and that helps a lot, especially when we get to these later action scenes, where that's pretty much all it's going to be in like the last half hour or so. But I love that we have those moments where we can stop and do like there's moments where they capture one, and then we can just kind of stop and like learn about it a little more and like study it more, and it's like we as an audience are basically studying it with them and learning more about them and learning the whole thing of eating is what causes them to multiply in this sort of gremlin-like way. um, and obviously these are significantly bigger and more disgusting in a good way. Um, but then we also have stuff like I love when Bert is like trapped in the shovel of the bulldozer or whatever it is, after they've learned more about them and what they can and can't see, and how they I almost kind of got the vibe of the aliens and signs from that too. Obviously, this is first before that, but the idea that Bert is laying in here and still like lecturing them on like being prepared and like doing your research and stuff like that. And I love that this is hilarious, but at the same time, it's a great moment for Bert's character because it shows that this is how like he's as good as he is that he's always prepared and like does research and everything like that. But it's like the timing of when he's lecturing them about this also makes it incredibly funny. And then the whole idea of when we're getting towards the end there, and we're starting to have that back and forth between Fred Ward and Helen Shaver, and the fact that they're doing this whole character thing. The playmate reveal might be a bit much, but obviously the thing that makes this funny is we are getting a bit more into the characters and kind of doing that thing where usually movies stop immediately, like not completely. They stop completely when you have to do the character development and stuff like that. But the fact that they're having these conversations they normally would in like a downtime scene with these things just kind of circling them is a really good way to do that. Also, in a way to make it feel like nothing ever really stops completely here. So all of that, and then obviously we get our climax, which I do like the idea of them having to go clever rather than big because of their budget. So the stuff when they like fire him or cover him with the fire extinguisher, which kind of covers his heat element, and him walking through. It's kind of like the stuff you'd see in later zombie stuff, where where people like disguise themselves as zombies and walk through a whole horde of them. And it's like this feels like kind of a precursor to stuff like that. That's really interesting. And then the fact that while we do get an explosion, that he keeps building up how big it's gonna be. It does still feel like we're in a budget place as far as action goes and as far as explosions go. But I kind of like the fact that it's, for the budget that it has, it's not like a big climax. But it doesn't feel small either. Like it doesn't feel within, a small budget either. And just the fact that that it doesn't take a whole sort of big elaborate thing to do this. Like the fact that the first movie, it was just guiding it off of a cliff. And in this case, it's just trapping them and blowing them up. And just like I said, the simplicity of that really brings back like this old-fashioned feeling to how monster movies were at one point, which these movies so far seem to be doing really well. So yes, I was really pleasantly surprised by this, especially for like a straight-to-video sequel. I would have never thought we'd get something that's of this quality, but here it is. So I'm very interested to see us get to the third. I'm pretty positive the third is when like Bert's kind of the main focus, I think, and then it kind of goes from there. And then, let's see, I've heard that they do start to lose their way after a while, but I'm not quite sure what point that is, so it'll be interesting to see if I can see, if I see the dip in quality the same as other people do. Maybe the ones that are seen as lesser I'll still like anyway, I have no idea, but I guess we'll find out once we get to the third one, and we'll see what that has in store. So, in the meantime, we're still doing everything we've been doing, versus stuff. We're going to start getting into horror stuff. I'll be talking about a trilogy right after this, I think, and then a few more things, and then we'll be into the horror stuff and the October stuff. So, and then we'll be talking award stuff and stuff like that as well. So, and new releases, just shit everywhere. So, until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.